Hello and welcome to Good in Theory. If you happen to be listening to this podcast on our website, that's great and I'm glad to have you. But I'd also recommend subscribing on a podcast playing app like Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Stitcher or Spotify. This will ensure that all the episodes are delivered to your device for free as soon as they're ready. The subscribe buttons are below the player on the website. Thanks. Today, as a bonus episode, I had a conversation with Rebecca Goldstein. Rebecca is a philosopher and novelist and has written 10 books, including one called Plato at the Googleplex, Why Philosophy Won't Go Away. In this conversation, we talk about Plato, Socrates, whether you can do politics and philosophy at the same time, why, in Rebecca's opinion, scientists should probably just lay off the IQ research. And we also talk about a recent event, which is a letter published in Harper's Magazine, signed by 150 writers and academics and intellectuals, making a plea for more open debate and less intolerance. The letter was published. Twitter went nuts. People are mad at it for all sorts of reasons. Rebecca was one of the signatories to this letter. So we talk about the response to this letter and how that might relate to Socrates' predicament in Athens. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Rebecca Goldstein. When I found out about Plato at the Googleplex, I really wanted to have you on the show for two reasons. One, because unlike most people who write books about Plato, you've written it in dialogue format. Plato is a character in your book, and that is unique. And the second reason is that you give the impression that you have a strong personal attachment to Plato. You care about Plato, and it comes through in your writing. So I'd love to start just by hearing your own story about why you decided to write a book about Plato.
Yeah, so my relationship with Plato goes back a long time. I should say I was brought up in an extremely religious household. I am living a life that I could not have begun to imagine that I'd be living, and being brought up in a very patriarchal culture. Wasn't even clear that I was going to get myself to college. But I was allowed to take out books from the library. My parents felt that if it was in the library, it was okay. And they allowed me quite a lot of freedom. I was a very bookish kid. And one Sabbath, I would go to the library every Friday before sundown to get my week's reading, but particularly the reading for the Sabbath because we weren't allowed to do anything else on the Sabbath. I took out this book called The Story of Philosophy. It was by Will Durant. And I was 12. And I had no idea even what philosophy was. And the first chapter was on Plato.
Always is.
I went crazy. It was my first experience of a kind of ecstasy. I didn't really know too much. Couldn't understand very much. I was quite poorly educated. But the idea that beyond, I remember he used the word phantasmagoria, and I had a little dictionary, and I looked up phantasmagoria, and my little dictionary didn't have it, and I thought, wow, this is a really smart book. They have words in here it's not even in the dictionary, to be so smart. But the beyond the phantasmagoria were these beautiful abstract structures, somewhat like mathematics. I liked mathematics very, very much. I mean, that was my other reading was mathematics. So, all the books in the library on math. It was, and I remember at a certain point, I had to just sort of look away from the book because just to catch my breath. It was just a beautiful image of the power of the mind, and that we could discover things through the power of the mind, and that I didn't really know what he was talking about here, but I kind of knew what he was talking about.
That might
And
be the sweet spot. I don't know.
it was the sweet, I think it was. Yeah. And it was, I think I launched my my ambition, my intellectual ambitions and my life ambitions, that I was going to join this fraternity slash sorority of people who could gain access to this kind of beautiful world of ideas.
And
Yeah,
how old were you when you had this
12.
experience?
I was
12.
12.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah. I was just becoming an atheist, and it was like it all just came in at the right moment. Yes.
And so when it comes to this recent book, why dialogues?
Dialogue. Well, I'll tell you. So I've always been experimenting with forms, literary forms, for making it as amusing and as accessible as possible. No matter what ideas I'm committed to, if I can understand it, anybody could understand it, basically. And so I've written novels, I've written all sorts of things. And then I had actually been asked to write a book on Plato by my editor. And it's funny because he'd actually only heard me give lectures on Platonism in mathematics, but he could see I was passionate about Platonism. And he asked me to write a book on Plato. And then, and so I started doing research. I'm not trained in ancient philosophy. I did, when I was in graduate school, I studied, I took seminars with Gregory Vlastos, one of the great, Plato scholars of all time. Very fortunate to have been able to study with him, but that wasn't my specialty. My specialty was philosophy of math, philosophy of physics. But anyway, I started, I plunged in, completely fell in love with ancient Greek culture. I just can't begin to say how much it grabbed me. And then, I was out walking, where I do most of my thinking when I'm out walking, and I thought, wait, how am I going to make this really, fun and amusing and entertaining? Oh, of course, dialogues. The man himself did it, right? He himself was trying to find a way of dramatizing ideas, and so what better way of doing it? And fortunately, my editor, went along with it all.
Do you think that the dialogue is, I mean, it is entertaining. It is very engaging. It's just hearing conversation or reading conversation grabs people more, I think, than just hearing a monologue, as a person who's slept through a lot of lectures. But do you think it's also makes a difference of what you're doing philosophically?
Oh gosh, absolutely. So one of the things you can do, and I like to do this when I write novels as well, is, and this is a very Platonic or Socratic idea, that philosophy is not this 9 to 5 thing that we do, it permeates one's entire life. And, and so Plato's dialogues aren't just talking heads. Oh, not at all, right? These are real people, and the way they talk, the way they present their ideas. Are they tentative, or are they bombastic? Are they open to hearing from other people, or are they narrow-minded and go off in a huff? Their ideas themselves, that they're presenting, permeates their entire personality, their character, and their behavior, and whether they're good or bad people, in fact. So, and I it sounds naive, but I believe that. I would not devote my life to philosophy unless I actually believe that what we believe and how we go about believing it, and how hard how much we care about the truth, cashes out in the lives that we lead, if it's a good life or a bad life. I mean, this is basically what Socrates told us: the unexamined life is not worth living. I believe that. I truly believe that.
What an insulting thing to say to all the Athenian jury who don't examine their lives.
Exactly.
Well,
And he sealed his fate, didn't he? Yes.
It sounds like a great inspirational quote, but what he's really saying in that situation is your unexamined life isn't worth living, to his audience. So So why do you think they killed him?
Beats me. He's just, yeah, told them your entire lives are based on unexamined premises, and I'd rather die than live the way you're living. What a thing to say, right? I'd rather die. And he really meant it, because at that point, as in the apology, when he presents it, he's already been voted guilty by his 501 jurists. And now they're supposed to be negotiating the penalty. And his accusers asked for death, so he's supposed to counter with no, I'll pay a fine, I'll pay a stiff fine, and or I'll go into exile or something. And no, he's not going to barter with them. He said, look, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm trying to save you guys from the worst fate possible, sleepwalking through your life. I'm trying to render you woke. And what do I think a fitting punishment would be? Free meals. Give me free meals for life.
Honor me like a champion.
You treat me like an Olympic champion, because that's what I am, because I'm really trying to do you some good instead of just entertaining you. So, and that's when he says, I'm not going to play your game. And what I'm going to say is, life at any price is just not worth it to me. I lived by my principles. I will die by my principles. It's an amazing moment. It really is.
I think that's my favorite part of the apology, the bargaining over the sentencing. But let's go back a little bit then, because that's not the only place he's not playing their game.
Yeah.
He's not playing their game from the word go. And so I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about why you think he was brought to trial at all, why they could not tolerate his philosophical practice.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the Athenians so prided themselves on their freedom of speech and freedom of thought. And he was quite the attraction. He was such, he was an exceptional man, and they revered exceptional men, right? And it was, so it's interesting that Athens would turn on him like this. I do think that the timing, and this is my own reading of it, I think the timing of the trial is very pertinent, because they had lost the Peloponnesian War, and by those, not very, by the Spartans, who couldn't even put a good sentence together, and they so prided.
Well, they could put a short sentence together this way.
A short sentence, right. A Spartan sentence, a laconic sentence. So so they had taken a big fall. It'd been how long? 31 years, the Peloponnesian War, and there had been the plague early on, and their empire, it was destroyed. The city as a whole had been guilty of hubris. Really, it was a collective hubris, and they were not, I don't think, in a mood. And there was the oligarchy, and they had just gotten rid of the oligarchy, and the democracy had been reinstated. And one of the first things they did in 399 BCE was to put Socrates on trial. I don't think that this is at all an accident. I think that you can tolerate, when you're riding high, you can tolerate criticisms of your way of life. When you're trying to resurrect yourself of importance, which they were doing collectively at that point, then this man who's been deriding them their whole lives and saying, you really must examine your lives, you think you're so great, but you're not, was not to be tolerated.
So you think it was just that they were extra cranky from the traumatic experience of the Peloponnesian War, that they could no longer laugh off what they laughed off 20 years before?
I think it's a little deeper than that, just because it was the Greek society in general, I believe, was a society that took, what did they think made life worth living? It's something of being extraordinary. I call it the ethos of the extraordinary, that they You wanted to live a life that was worthy of being sung by the poets. Kleos is fame and glory, and it's not so very unlike our culture, right? They were pre-monotheistic, we're post-monotheistic. And it's interesting to me when I look at the culture to see the parallels, now that it's no longer trying to gain, a good life in terms of, what God had supposedly tells us, and gaining God's approval. It's gaining one another's attention, and your fame or money or this sort of thing. This is very similar, I think, to the culture of the ancient Greeks. Only there you had to do something, truly big so that you would be spoken about. When in that wonderful moment in the Iliad, where Achilles, who's revered as the greatest of the Greek heroes in classical Greece, he's given the choice between a long but unextraordinary life or a short but song-worthy life, to be known through the ages. He chooses the short one, and indeed, the Iliad, the alternative name for the Iliad is the Song of Achilles, right? There
Right.
he is being sung, right? So, so to be vanquished in this way, when to the heart of their view of what made life worth living, they couldn't all as individuals be extraordinary, but they were participating in an extraordinary culture, and that gave them the sense of, yes, this was a life worth living. And here was this guy saying, no, it's not.
So
That's
let
not.
me try to recap
Yeah.
that. That's so interesting. We'll put it, the idea is that there's this long religious period of human history where we're turned inward and trying to gain the recognition of God. But before that, in Greece, and now presumably on social media or something,
Yes.
we're trying to gain each other's recognition, fame, attention, but even maybe approval. People want to do something and be noted. And that is sort of our link to, I don't know, immortality, something longer, kleos, fame, praise. And the hero of the Greek culture is Achilles, who chose fame over life. And everyone just goes wild for him
Yeah.
because he did the thing. He embodied this value of, it matters that people speak about me, not that I get to be comfortable.
Exactly.
And so all of the Athenians, they believe this of themselves. And the reason, this is the turn that I found very interesting, because it goes from this individual notion of distinguishing oneself, like Achilles does, the hero, to this collective distinction. We are all participating in the project of Athens, which is glorious. We've had Pericles, we've built an empire, we've stolen all this, treasure from the Delian League, we've done all this building on the
Yeah.
Acropolis, and they were riding high on that. And then when they're struck down by plague and war and Sparta and the 30, they're not feeling so great. And so that Socrates is still there saying, haha, I told you so, you're worthless, stung even more.
That's my theory. That is my
Okay,
theory.
yeah. If you had to put yourself in the mind of someone, what is the best case you can come up with against Socrates?
Yeah. Well, somebody you could say, that somebody who is willing to doubt everything and always forcing people to put the social norms, the social conventions up for rational debate. That our powers of reason are feeble, and so maybe we're not going to be able to do it. And this causes a kind of skepticism and could lead to anarchy. I think that's the best thing that I would concentrate on our feeble reasoning powers. I think 2000 and some odd years after this, we still have a great deal of evidence of how feeble
Okay, so
we think.
the best reason to kill a philosopher is because everyone else's powers of reason are so feeble that you might get into skepticism and not be able to find your way out.
That's right. That's right. And then and give up what you ought not to give up, and maybe just fall back on a postmodern, renunciation of there even being such a thing as truth. And without truth, the only thing that would remain is power. My group dominating your group, and this sort of picture.
All
Now,
right,
of course,
so
Socrates never put that up to doubt, nor Plato, right? That, for them, there was such a thing as truth, and this truth certainly
of
mattered.
course, yeah.
But if you're going to keep, going after everything, well, why not go after truth itself? And then, then there's really nothing then to rein us in. How dangerous.
In
Yeah,
that
I
case, I
think,
want to
yeah.
ask you then if there's, so we can make this argument from two sides. And what you seem to be articulating there is something about the relationship between philosophy and politics. And a lot of people read the apology as being about philosophy and politics.
Yeah.
And the usual argument is that, well, politics is such a bastard, they're always going to come after philosophers because they get angry and they can't understand what Socrates is really up to. But what you've just said to me is a little bit more like philosophy is actually quite dangerous. And politics better be careful, or you're going to wind up in this postmodern nihilistic free-for-all.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
No,
I
this is
wonder what
yeah.
you think about how politics and philosophy can get along, if they can get along, or what about Socrates' solution of keeping them a little bit separate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, of course, I was making that case because you said
Of
make
course,
the
I put
best
you in a
case.
position
Yeah.
to kill.
Yes. Right.
Rebecca Goldstein does not say kill philosophers.
Right. Nor do I say that we can question whether truth matters. I'm enough of a Platonist that that is. I don't think we can question that. Given that I do think that the truth matters. And given that I do also believe that our powers of reasoning are quite feeble, and that, it's very, very hard to see past our motivated reasoning. We're all motivated reasoners. None of us are these perfect, pure, objective thinkers. That that philosophy is quite useful, especially if we call in as many people, diverse people as possible, right? This is certainly something that even Socrates, espoused. Meno, right? He has slave boy, enter into his dialogues. I think that's important.
Yeah, but the conclusion was not that the slave had a different viewpoint, but that he shared the same viewpoint that everyone would from eternity.
That's right. That's right. But so that, since they were so committed to Socrates and Plato, so committed to the view that reason, if you really follow reason, you will end up with the same conclusions, right? So there's not that diversity of opinion, but there is diversity, in the way that we use diversity. Different people, women, men, rich, poor, upper class, lower class.
They can all find their way around a triangle.
They can all find very well, exactly. And that there's a way of abstracting from, the culturally induced differences, blah, 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 right? I actually believe that.
Right.
I believe that this is true. And I believe, that that's a political truth as well. That is that everybody has to be, that's why I think democracy is a very good thing, right? That it is, everybody has to have a part of this. Everybody has to be participating. Everybody has to feel the responsibilities for this government as a personal project, because we all see so through a glass darkly. All of us do. So bring in as many different colored glasses as possible.
But
So
why do you
yeah.
think, if you're that much of a Platonist, that will get us any closer to the truth?
Oh well, there's where my Platonism has, or maybe it's the Platonism of the Meno. It's that if we ask the right questions, if we, I sound like a kind of Pollyanna there, but I mean, asking the right questions is important, but digging out the hidden premises, bringing them up to the surface, examining them with people who find them objectionable, um, and needing to defend them, that this is a uh, political behavior, and that it's a way of trying to get around the limitations of our thinking, and we've made some
So
progress.
why does Socrates and I think Plato disagree with you so strongly here? So I just want to refer to
Yeah,
Socrates' argument in the Apology, where he says, if you want to stay alive and you care about justice or the truth at all, you better stay away from politics because they will
yeah,
kill you.
yeah.
Why does he think that they'll kill any person of integrity? And why don't you think that?
Well, I'd like to think that our I would like to think that our modern democratic institutions had been designed by people who knew Plato's and Socrates' arguments against democracy and why it was so short-lived, really. I mean, it was a long time being developed, and then it came crashing down quite soon, afterwards. And so, I would like to think. Are you here? Are you in the U.S. or are you
I'm in
Canadian?
Canada, so
Yeah,
nearly there. Just looking from nearby worriedly.
yeah, yeah. We're all extremely worried. Yes. One would have liked to have thought, until it was put to the test recently, that these institutions had been designed so that we could prevent what uh, Plato warned us of in the Republic, that the next step in the degradation of governments after democracy is tyranny.
Well, I thought that your constitution was designed precisely to avoid the degradation into democracy, which is, I
Degradation
mean, you
into
have
democracy. Yes.
in the Federalists, they say, even if every Athenian had been a Socrates, every assembly still would have been a mob, because
Yeah.
they thought that this whole participatory, democratic, everyone can think for themselves
Yeah.
attitude was precisely the problem, precisely why Socrates was killed.
Yeah. I agree
So,
with you entirely. Yeah. No, I agree with you entirely. That's what the Electoral College was all about. That's what the ownership of land and only landowners, male white landowners could, but the Electoral College absolutely was designed against full participatory direct democracy.
right, even the
Um,
idea of representation is supposed to be, our wisest, our best, leading us.
exactly, exactly,
Um,
exactly. So yes, um, never and nevertheless, and it is cracking. It is cracking very, very badly.
Even on the more abstract issue of then where do we put philosophy? Because, we started with, well, what's the relationship between philosophy and politics? And you said,
Yeah.
well, everyone, we have to all take responsibility for politics and also kind of do philosophy on it. And so I was pushing back because I'm thinking of Socrates' argument about how philosophy cannot survive politics. And
Mm-hmm.
then we got to this other separation where maybe the founders thought that you can't have democratic politics because democratic politics will kill philosophy, but maybe if you have these elected wise men in Congress, they might be able to do the philosophy for everyone.
Yeah.
It might be
Yeah.
seen like more of a Platonic solution. But
Yeah.
even now, like, do you think even leaders who you back and you think have integrity, do you think you can be a political leader or active politically and be doing philosophy at the same
And
time?
be a philosopher. Hmm. I mean, you could be philosophical. You could take it seriously, you know. Politics is the art of, you know, it's very concrete, it's very real. You have to deal with people, and, you know, it's different talents. I just wanted to say one thing that I would like to get in, you know, that I think our founders, you know, got it very, very wrong. They really were not understanding what the degradation from democracy to tyranny, and it's really interesting when you go back and you look at the Republic. Um, it's the oligarch, the democracy had evolved. There was this long sort of, you know, spiral down, you know, from the best um, government to the worst, tyranny. And the step before democracy was a plutocracy, right, where it's the rich who are in power, and there is a tremendous disparity between the rich and the poor, so much so that Plato says there are two cities, the city of the rich and the city of the poor. It's not one city that has their interests in common. These are two cities with their interests
Right.
hostile and opposition to each other. And it's from that situation, it's from a ruined democracy that has already been ruined because it evolved out of a plutocracy. It's from that democracy that then, you know, you have a tyrant arising who's going to speak to the poor and say, yeah, it's going to feed on their resentment, on their justified resentment.
So you seem to be saying that you think that the U.S. is somewhere between tyranny and democracy right now?
Yeah, I think in fact that the democracy that we have had, you know, where the rich are so much in power, and kind of call the shots in politics, right? You know, it's long campaigns and take so much money, and, you know, people like the Koch brothers and all of these, you know, they can buy people for their own self-interested, greedy ends. This is exactly the kind of so-called democracy from which a tyrant can arise, and it's really right there in the pages of the Republic. So I think it's that, you know, that has really, I mean, for us it's been slavery, but it's also been incredible inequality in classes, in wealth, in
All
power.
right. That is so interesting. And so maybe with that, we can bring the chat around to the other current event that I wanted to talk to you about. And I think this might be an interesting link to all those questions about Socrates' persecution. Yesterday, or the day before, 150 writers and other intellectual types, academics, published an open letter on justice and open debate in Harper's Magazine. And these signatories said that they liked protest and inclusion, and they don't like Trump, but that they wanted to speak out against the, I quote, intolerant climate that has set in on all sides, end quote. So this letter goes out, and immediately Twitter gets mad. There are people jumping in to complain about the letter, the tone, the signatories, basically everything about it. And you, Rebecca, were one of the signatories. So I would love to hear your take on what's in the letter, why you signed it, and the reaction to the whole thing.
Well, it was, let me see, it was about 3 weeks ago, I think, I got this letter from someone I know quite well, Mark Lilla, a political scientist, and he sent me the letter and asked if I would sign it. And I'm going to tell you something, and Mark actually could back this up. I first refused. Not that I really disagreed with it. I said it's an excellent letter. You know, it's a little mealy mouth, and, you know, it's a little vague, and, you know, all that. But this is the wrong time. It's going to be seen as a reaction against the protests, against racial injustice, police brutality. And yeah, I'm upset by, you know, people being muzzled. I've never been muzzled. But I am upset by it, and this is not ideal, especially for people who have, who are young and starting out and are afraid to speak their mind. It's not good. But we have so much worse going on right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm happy that people are out on the streets protesting this obscenity of racial injustice that's been there from the very beginning. And then actually a few things happen, a few more incidents of people being attacked, because people didn't like, and they were not saying terrible things. They were not saying, they very far from anything white supremacist. No, these were scholars who were not quite towing the line. And
Can you
and
give
being
us an example,
silent.
or
Well, so
I
for
don't like, I'm not
example,
trying to name names. I'm just curious what we're talking about.
yeah, something. So for example, one of our most horrible, in my opinion, senators, senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton, he wrote a horrible op-ed in the New York Times magazine, and it was ridiculously written, and it was, and it was, of course, very anti the protests going on, and the fact that that this had been allowed. Now he's a senator. This is a man with power. He's voting in the Senate. So yeah, let's hear from him. Let's have other people publish things showing what an asinine and misleading and hypocritical and riddled with fallacies article that was. That's the way to do it, right? No, what happened was the editor of the Times opinion page was fired. And I thought that was a bad thing. Somebody in a think tank, a liberal think tank, uh, tweeted maybe or wrote a paper where he cited the work of a social scientist who happens to be an African American, showing that sometimes protests, if they get violent, can be linked with the repression.
Right.
This happened with the Nixon riots, and so and for citing this man's research, statistical
Right.
research, he was fired. So these things happened in the meantime, and then I decided this is not good, and and I decided to sign it. And I didn't think I was worried about that. I didn't ask who the co-signers were. I knew it was two, Mark Lilla and Steven Pinker, because I'm married to him, and so he had gotten the same letter. But I didn't think it was. I wanted to know who it was. I could tell from the letter because it starts by, saying what to me or the obvious politically
Right.
justified things about Trump is dangerous and the protests are good and all that. I didn't think it was, going to be written by any, reckless alt-right people or something like that. And I know that Mark Lilla is not such a person. And when I did see it printed yesterday, I saw that they had made a real effort for diversity. I mean, there were left-wingers, Noam Chomsky and Howard Atwood, there were right-wingers, although nobody terribly on the right. There were young, old, black, white, it was,
Right.
they've done a good job. But there has been some tremendous venom that came gushing forth. I've gotten a lot of letters asking, and even some journalists asking to pen this.
Already, was this?
Yeah,
When did the letter go out? Was it yesterday or the day before?
it was printed. What's today? Wednesday? I think it was
Yeah.
printed yesterday. Yeah, journalists from Norway. I mean, it's so interesting how everybody pays so much attention to what happens in the U.S. But but yeah, so and actually at least one quite good friend who just, who disagreed with it respectfully. He thought it was a mistake for the reasons that I had been so reluctant to sign it at first. This is not the time. I
Right.
understand. I understand that. But people, here's one of the myths. I understand that, and it gave me great pause. Here's one of the misreadings of it that I'm really surprised at, which is people understood this. It's very prominent people. I'm the least prominent person on it for sure. It's Noam Chomsky, Margaret Atwood, Wynton Marsalis. The people who signed it were not complaining about themselves. They were trying, and that was one of the misreadings, like, wah, wah, boo-hoo, you famous people, you got such a big platform, so somebody disagrees with you on Twitter and you're weeping these crocodile tears. That never would even cross, I think, everybody's mind. A few of those people had been severely censored. Oh, so Rowling is on there, and
Right.
she's, yeah.
Renowned transphobe J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, exactly. So, but for the most part, no, it's not oneself and that really surprised me, and I.
So what do you think accounts for it? Why so much venom?
I don't know. I don't know. I think things have gotten very mean. They've gotten really mean, and you always look for, especially if it's not your allies. Maybe you're somebody who really thinks, everybody who disagrees with this, whatever it is that you believe, has got to be censored, and so you look for like such a mean interpretation of motives. And we do this. I mean, something has gotten very mean, and that was what the letter was saying, that we've got to be able to speak to one another. We have to be able to think past. Here's one of the things that's really interesting also. Truth. I think the truth matters, and I think to deny that it matters is just nonsensical, because that very assertion that it doesn't matter, well, is that true? I mean, it's just, to assert something is to say that it's true. It's a prosaic, truth is prosaic. We don't need any fancy theories of truth, right? That's where we can go wrong. It's just, snow is white if and only if snow is white, right? And that proposition is true if, in fact, there's a fact backing it up. So language is not used like that anymore, and this is politics. Language is often, there are many things we do with language. There was many language games we play, right? And sometimes we use language to affirm our allegiance to a certain group. I pledge allegiance, right? And there are certain propositions which are either true or false, like climate change is real and man-made, right? It's either true or false. There's a lot of empirical evidence for it's being true, but that proposition is no longer even in certain groups is never. When people deny it, it's not to say, oh, I've got the evidence against it. I'm a climate expert and I can defeat it. It's to say, I belong to this group, and this is
Right.
one of the things, this is how. And sometimes the more outrageous the things, the more empirically falsified the things that you are asserting to be true, the more you're showing your allegiance, what a good follower you are. You see this in religion all the time, right?
We see this in Kant, I think. The dumber the thing you do to be moral, the more it proves that you're a moral person.
Exactly. So, the extreme, really extreme things shows, what you are. So, if I call black white, because my group tells me to, oh, I'm loyal. My compatriots can trust me.
But okay, so let's come away from the climate denial examples are things that seem to be obviously empirically one way or the other. But there are a lot of other more ambiguous signals as to your political allegiance, things that will take on a different meaning. So in one sense, I would say that I'm pro-life because I don't like death, but politically, right, as a topic on abortion, I'm certainly not.
Very good.
So
Yeah.
I think that there might be, there's many functions that language is doing, and one of them, at least, or one set of them, seems to be really political,
Yeah.
and another one might not be. There might be a discussion to be had about the severity and reality of climate change, but if you're not on the party line in public, you sound like a shill for Exxon who's denying climate change.
Yes. No, that's certainly true. I mean, the thing is that I think, for propositions which are either true or false, to take on this role, this political role, this is dangerous. I mean, it happens right, and it happens on the left. And it's a dangerous, it is, as if, the truth doesn't even matter. Well, look, the truth is our friend. If we believe false things, reality's gonna kick us in the ass sooner or later. It's, it's a good thing to believe true things.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is, it's just treating something as a question of truth might be a different activity than treating something politically. So,
I
right?
agree. Yes.
Life
right.
is good. Yes,
Yeah.
maybe that we can argue whether we're pro-life, but once it's a discussion about political rights and abortion, then this is not up for discussion anymore, right?
Yeah.
We're doing a different kind of thing. We're committing a political act.
Exactly. Now, still, there too, I think, since I believe there is such a thing as moral truth, that, we could argue this. I actually, I have to tell you that I had to be convinced about abortion.
Right.
I did. I couldn't see it for a very long time. And and I kept asking people who had a different position than myself for their arguments. I got convinced, changed my mind. It's a good thing when that happens, right?
Right. But I mean, you can also understand why people might want to shut down the debate after they've established
yes,
position.
I can understand that. But when you actually meet somebody who holds a different position, I don't think you should shut down the debate. I think we should be very patient.
I think it depends. Well, so I'm thinking of Socrates, okay? So why does he want to stay the heck out of politics and only lead a private life in the agora? Yeah. I think it's because he wants to do philosophy. And you say you can be political and be philosophical because you can take things seriously. But I think the key to philosophy is not taking a lot of things seriously. For instance, nearly all of the things that Socrates suggests in the Republic, like women exercising naked with men in the gymnasium, or the philosopher kings, or the destruction of the family, any of those things.
Right.
He's like, let's not take those seriously. Let's forget all these prejudices and these moral commitments that we have so we can get up in our thoughts and get wild with it.
Yeah, but you know what? If whether some people are going to live good lives and others not good lives depends partly on the political decisions that we make. I'm committed as a philosopher to everybody's life being, the maximally flourishing that it can possibly be. That is, to me, something that I would philosophically defend. And that means that to some extent, since how good a life one lives depends an awful lot on politics, I mean, that we kind of have an ethical obligation. Does that make sense to you?
I look, this makes great sense to me. This makes great political and moral sense to me, but I don't know if that's a philosophical commitment. Right.
Well, it's
so when I picture philosophy, it's Socrates just saying the most wild off the wall ideas. Let's talk about it. And to me, what you're talking about, the kind of racial injustice in the United States and elsewhere, this is philosophically very low hanging fruit. There's not a whole confusing set of dots we have to connect to see that it's wrong. And so this is what I'm trying to drive at, is that sometimes what is philosophy in the seminar room or in a private conversation can feel like bad politics in another context, for example, on Twitter or anywhere else. And what's good politics is actually not always very interesting philosophy because it's glaringly obvious.
Yeah, well, I suppose that is true. I'd be very happy to be talked out of being philosophically committed, and I wasted an awful lot of time in it. Yeah, I'm not, and you're right. It's not intellectually interesting. You're absolutely right. One's not using one's finely trained
Yeah.
philosophical mind in this thing. I understand this, but um, but it still seems an obligation.
Yes.
Maybe not as a philosophical obligation, but an obligation, right? I mean, an obligation of anybody.
So
Anybody.
how about this? Is it an obligation on Socrates? Because it did look like he was causing trouble. He was saying a lot of pro-oligarchic talking points.
Yeah,
A lot
yeah.
of his students, did really bad things. So maybe was it his obligation to, in the agora where everyone could hear him, tone it down a little bit? Or to go on record saying he supports the new democracy and no more coups, guys?
Mm. Yeah, he wanted to keep his complete independence from both sides. He didn't collude with the oligarchy, but nor did he support the democracy. No, it's true. Well, I actually think he was wrong in that, right? So yes, I think he should have gone on record, stood up in the pnyx or the agora, and said that we've got to support the new democracy. Yeah.
That's quite interesting. So do you, as a public philosopher yourself, do you think there's a difference, there's a moral commitment that you're obliged to as a public philosopher that you wouldn't necessarily be obliged to as a private philosopher?
Somehow always felt that to live the life of a philosopher, of an intellectual, of a writer, such a privilege. Um, that there was a special obligation to participate in civic society as a kind of penance. I mean, to me, I don't like it, but it's a kind of, oh, you're going to pay me to think what I should be, I don't know, mopping floors or something,
Right.
doing something useful. So I owe it. I sort of especially owe it, and that perhaps, now this is going to sound, but perhaps since one spends one's life separating, making distinctions, this concept, that concept, what follows, right? Thinking of counterexamples, following consequences, that maybe that can be applied, as you say, it's kind of in a low level way to some political questions, and it often happens.
If you disagree with Socrates for his quietism and passivity,
Quietism, yeah.
what are the things you most disagree with Plato about?
Huh. Gosh. I don't think that the intellectual life necessarily makes you a better person. He was always trying to, how I think that might be my greatest, disagreement with him.
20 years of math, people are still a jerk.
Exactly, exactly right. And some of the most pompous, insufferable people I know are brilliant, physicists, mathematicians, and yeah, it doesn't purify the soul in a way which he so, foolishly believed. He didn't have to. He founded the academy. He did not have to sit through academic department meetings and listen to right? So I like it. It was, it's the it was fine. It was the beginning. Who knew? It was a nice hypothesis. It has been so thoroughly falsified.
There was a recent empirical article by some psychologists who had done a study and sent out letters, and I can't remember what the exact study was, but they were studying if ethics professors were any more ethical than anyone else, and there's no evidence of that.
no,
Yeah.
no. I know I read that. It was
I
very,
used to teach ethics and tell my students specifically, this won't make you a better person,
yeah.
but bad person or good person, you'll be better at justifying what you're going to do.
What you said to your students is exactly right. You will be able to justify yourself, whether virtuously or viciously, better if you study philosophy. Plato, I think he thinks, that it can all be done by intellectual work. No, it can't. That's not what's going to make us better people. No, it's not what's going to open our eyes.
Now that we've talked a little bit about Plato and Socrates leaning too far on the philosophical side and thereby neglecting their political duties or missing the political point, I want to bring it back to that Harper's letter and ask whether you think that having an open and free discussion is always a good idea, or if sometimes it makes sense to constrain speech.
Yeah. As we had already said, we do many things with speech, many games that we play. And, there is speech which is not said. I think that anything, when speech is being used to make an assertion, where you're saying this is true, I think, let people say it, and let people, falsify the hell out of it, right? Just. But if speech is being used as a weapon, to belittle, to diminish, to shut people up, then it's not an assertion of truth that we can debate. And I think it should be limited. I don't think that that speech should be used in that way.
Do you think that separation can be sustained?
No, I think that is. You mean in the fury of it all?
Well, no, I just mean there a lot of factual truths that you could say, and they will have a predictable political effect and will be used in different ways. They might be inflammatory. If you pick every egregious crime committed by one minority group and start just saying that it's factually true, it did happen.
Yeah.
And that might produce really bad results that,
Yes, absolutely. And then, and of course you come back with, the statistics of, the other groups and what they did and what they could.
But this is an empirical question whether people come back and refute it. That's not
true.
Philosophically certain. Yeah.
And here's something, actually, look, there are certain things I think we shouldn't go there. Like there are certain questions that scientists could try to figure out, right? And some of them do. And the results are not going to help anybody. They maybe they're true. So maybe women are dumber than men, right? Not statistically, right? Or and we know how that's going to be used, right?
Right.
Maybe women can't do math as well as men can do math, or something like that. What good is it gonna? Just don't go there. That's not something to explore. That's my view, right? Because what good is it? It's not going to dissuade the women who love math and want to do math, right?
Well, I think the part of the argument is precisely that it will.
It will do it, exactly. It will do it. I mean, and all it does, and even the women who don't want to do math just end up feeling bad about anything that they do want to do, or
right.
Putting their 2 cents into any conversation. When a man tells them to shut up, they're going to shut up, and that's not good for anybody, right? That's not. So there are certain disparities between people that is not going to do anybody any good to know.
And even if it were true, you wouldn't be able to draw any moral conclusion from it, but you can predict that people will, right? If you said on average women have this fewer IQ points, that tells you nothing about any individual or where they should stand or the moral question at all.
People will misuse it because they're too dumb to understand statistics and how you apply it, and you can't apply it to judging the individual, right?
Which is why I think the question of, what's philosophy? When are we using something as a statement of what is, and when are we using something to hurt or politically? I think it's a much more vexed question.
It is a vexed question, and I bring this up as an example to support you in what you're saying. I agree with you in this.
All right. Well, thank you very much for talking to me. That was a lot
It
of
was
fun.
great fun. Great fun.
And if we could just prolong the fun for a couple more minutes, usually at the end of episodes of Good in Theory, I like to leave with a short, fun argument or piece of research that didn't really fit into the main section of the episode. And since you are so well versed in the characters in the Platonic world, I was hoping you'd be able to tell us a little bit about one of the spiciest of those characters who got Socrates into a lot of trouble, Alcibiades.
Oh, Alcibiades, what a guy. He was beautiful, very, very smart, incredibly seductive to anybody who was alive at that time. I mean, men, women, Athenians, Spartans, everybody. He was quite full of himself and incredibly charismatic. He's featured at the end of Plato's dialogue, the Symposium. Just, they're all having a serious speech without any drinking and making speeches about love. And then Alcibiades comes crashing in wearing a wreath of flowers and totally drunk, and it goes to all hell. Well, Alcibiades betrayed Athens. He talked the Athenians into a completely calamitous invasion of Sicily. It went very, very bad. They lost a lot of men, a lot of ships. It was a disaster. And then, as he was being called back to Athens to be punished, he realized that. So he betrayed Athens and went to Sparta, right? And then he was a leader there. And then he went back to Athens. And betrayed them again. And then he went to Persia, the worst enemy of the ancient Greeks, and he was assassinated there by where there are two different.
Could have been anyone at that point.
Could have been anyone, the whole civilized world.